So this is now how we can manage multiple files with TypeScript. Now, one word about having multiple files. When you work with multiple files, as we're doing it here, you can also import them into each other with modules, which you might know from vanilla JavaScript. There we have modules as well. It is something I'll cover in a dedicated section of this course though. So for now, we just have two files which are not imported into each other, but which are instead imported into index.html. Now with that out of the way though, we know that we can manage this as a project and that we can compile multiple files here. Now let's have a look at the tsconfig.json file, because this is a crucial file for managing this project. It essentially tells TypeScript how it should compile these files. Now, before we dive into the compiler options, where we, as the name suggests, can configure how the compiler behaves, let's scroll down to the place before the closing curly brace, but after this nested closing curly brace. And let's see some of the options we can add here which don't affect the compiler or the compilation step behavior, but instead how the compiler works with this project. Because there, for example, you can set a exclude option. Now, if you add exclude here, that will be an array. And what you can enter here are paths to files which should not be included in compilation when you run TSC on the entire project. So for example, here we could say we want to exclude analytics.ts from compilation. Now, of course, this doesn't make much sense here, but just to show how this works. If we do that, and we now rerun TSC, and I first of all delete analytics.js so that we can see if it is recreated. If we now run TSC or TSC in watch mode, you see no analytics.js file is created. The reason for that is that we're excluding that file. Now, of course, for this file, this doesn't make a lot of sense because I typically want to include it. But if you had a file that for some reason shouldn't be compiled, you can exclude it like this. You can also work with wildcards. And for example, if you had a file that's named analytics.dev.ts and you don't really want to compile that, you could say all files that end with dev.ts should not be compiled. And you can do that by also adding an asterisk here, which is a wildcard basically. And now TypeScript will ignore any files that have .dev.ts included. You could also add asterisk slash here, and that would mean any file with that pattern in any folder will be ignored. So these are things you can set up here. The only thing I want to set up here, and that is a setting you will often find, is that I want to exclude node modules. And the idea here is that I don't want to compile any TypeScript files I might have inside of node modules. Now, node modules is that folder that holds all the dependencies we install here in package.json and the dependencies of these dependencies. And therefore, these are third-party libraries we're importing, which we don't want to touch. And if any of these libraries should ship some TypeScript code, then we certainly don't want to compile it. It will just slow down our compilation process, and in the worst case, it might even break our project. So therefore, it's quite common to exclude node modules here, though I will say, if you don't specify the exclude option at all, node modules is automatically excluded as a default setting. So you don't really need to add this option here. This would be the default. I just want to show that exclude exists and how you could use it. If the only thing you want to exclude is node modules, you don't have to add the exclude key at all. If you do add it though, you should set node modules because otherwise it will not exclude that. Now besides exclude, we also have include, and include allows you to do the opposite. It allows you to specifically tell TypeScript which files you want to include in the compilation process. And anything that's not listed here will not be compiled. So if I point at app.ts here, you'll see if I rerun TSC, we also will get no analytics.ts file, or no analytics.js file, I should say. Why? Because analytics.js is not included in include, and as I said, if we do set the include key, then we really have to include everything we want to compile. So of course here, we could then also add analytics.ts here, and with that addition, we would start and compile it. As you see now, we have the analytics.js file. Or as an alternative, we specify a whole folder here, which typically holds the files we want to compile. Exclude, by the way, if set alongst include, will filter down include. So if we exclude some subfolder of a folder that is part of include, then that excluded subfolder will be excluded. So basically we compile include minus exclude. Now, of course, here I don't want to set include, I want to compile all TypeScript files, and therefore I don't have to worry about that. Excluding node modules is all I need, and as I explained, theoretically I don't even need to add that because that would be excluded by default. Now you also have a files option. This allows you to point at individual files. So it's a bit like include, with the difference that here you can't specify whole folders which you want to include. Instead, you really just specify the individual files you want to compile. That might be an option for smaller projects where you know you will only work with 3 files, and for some reason you got a couple of other TypeScript files which you don't want to touch though. Then you can set a list of files like this. In reality, you might not need that setting that often though. And therefore, that's it with the basic compilation or project management options here. Now, of course, there is way more we can specify though. Way more we can specify about the compiler itself and how it behaves during the compilation step.